At LSI, we don't just follow trends, we help shape the future. Welcome to Behind the Win, the podcast where we break down the biggest moves in tech, innovation, leadership, and government contracting. Here at LSI, we're bringing you exclusive conversations with the minds behind groundbreaking advancements, disruptive strategies, and industry-defining wins. From retail to tech, defense to government solutions. This is where you get the insights to stay ahead. Let's go behind the win.
Welcome to Behind the Win, where we go deeper into how visionary leaders are shaping industries and communities. Today, we're joined by Jessica Dixon, the people-centered leader behind LSI's evolving HR strategy. Jessica has helped transform hiring, culture, and internal development during one of the most complex times in the workforce. In this conversation, she shares how to hire with intention, lead with empathy, and build a culture that truly lasts. Jess, thanks for being on.
Thank you.
We're excited to have you. Let's start with this idea, and it's kind of been this trend. We've talked to people throughout the past few podcasts of people first hiring. How do you define it, and why is it more important now than ever?
Well, I would define people first hiring as thinking about the candidate experience as well as the individual that's doing the job. You're not just filling a requisition with job duties and roles. Like, what is that person who's going to come in and really just succeed? So that's kind of how I would define people first in this sense of hiring. But then when you think about what that looks like, recruitment, job postings, everything related to that is all powered by technology, and there's AI backing in some ways. And so, you always want to make sure you're centered around the candidate experience and that you're finding the right person, not just, filling a role or an empty seat, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So,
And why is that important today? Is that because word of mouth? They tell, what?
Absolutely. Yeah. Your reputation is so important. We talk a lot about our employer brand. So how we treat candidates throughout the experience, whether they're selected, whether they're not, will just be out there in the world. And people talk, right? Especially in a smaller, kind of metropolitan area here locally in Layton. Like, I know people that, you work for LSI. I know all about that. And so you want to make sure that you have a good reputation that way. But inversely too, when you're thinking about who you're up against, and we're not just up against other employers in Layton when we have job postings, like we're up against everyone in the nation, because remote work and hybrid work hybrid really won't matter in that sense, but remote work is so prevalent that now if we have a remote job, we're now not just competing in our local area, we're competing with other employers, huge employers, small employers, all different kinds of employers that hopefully we can kind of highlight or make that experience memorable for them so that they want to work for us and that they get a sense of who we are in that process too. So instead of just walking down the street seeing help wanted signs and applying there, now we have every other job posting on Indeed that we're sort of competing against to get good candidates. So it's important to make it really about the people that are, going through that process, and make it about the person who's going to succeed then further in the role.
Sure. And you and your team do a great job of that, because prior to coming here, I don't think I thought of, I think employers do think like, hey, we're the one hiring, not like, hey, what value do they bring and what value can we bring to them with this job? And so you guys do a really great job of constantly hounding, if for lack of a better term, our folks, our managers, our leads, whoever, to say, we don't want the posting to go stagnant. We don't want people waiting. We want to give everyone a reply. And I think that that's respectful. And again, another common theme of just hearing different leaders that have come on the podcast.
Yeah, you have to remember what it's like to be looking for a job. And if you haven't looked for a job in 20 years, you won't know what it's like today. And so now that you think about, if I'm interacting with anyone online, I want to know that I'm interacting with a person. I don't want to just feel like I'm getting an auto reply and that I never get any follow-up or feedback. So it's important to keep it about that individual and make sure that they recognize that they're seen as like a human and that they're interacting with other people. We certainly have help with technology, but it doesn't erase that sort of human interaction and approach.
Absolutely. How do you see the role of HR evolving from a support function to a strategic partner at the table? And I'm going to answer this after you too, for sure.
Well, you go first. Go ahead. I'm just kidding. Well, I think it depends on the company, right? And the leadership, the whole strategy. If you're and as an HR leader or practitioner, how you view your contributions, whether they're strategic direction, whether they're driving strategic goals or whether they are sort of more of a compliance heavy, procedural type contribution, then that's sort of going to shape how you're seen. So I think it's critical for the HR, team or the HR strategy to include, well, it's critical for HR strategy to be part of the overall focus and not be separate from what the business is doing. But HR should also understand what drives the business forward, what helps it grow. It's important to understand how to engage and reward your people, but what does the business care about? Are we innovating or are we, becoming best in class in this other area? Like what do we care about and how do we align our people and our goals to that? If you're not in sync, you won't be really seen as at the table. You'll be that compliance driver, the person who's, keeping everyone in check. And there's a place for that. But ultimately, to be seen as a strategic partner, you'll have to really understand the strategy of the business.
Absolutely. And I think for my piece of this is prior to coming here, anything HR people oriented was a roadblock for us, right? And so I didn't come from places that it was conducive that they were really our strategic partners. I don't think they understood our goals. It doesn't matter if it was our OKRs, our high level business, type goals. They didn't get it. And so coming here, I laughed because I think I told you this other day that my husband was like, we were watching a show and he said, babe, if you were president, who would be your chief of staff? And I said, okay, like chief of staff, like it's your, he's like, yeah. I said, I think it'd be Jess. And he's like,
Wow.
That's your most senior advisor. And I was like, yes, because he also, not to mention where he comes from a place where I don't even think they're on site or in person. Do you see someone that's in HR? So it's like, they're not a strategic partner to them, but I don't think there's a big decision that I or our executive team makes that you're not at the forefront or a big part of that. Right. And I think that it's our checks and balances of, you do know the business, so you can give me the people side. And where CEOs, maybe sometimes we think of all that, but you're going to bring those certain aspects of the people side to the forefront too.
Yeah. I just want to know who has more influence, the chief of staff or the first husband, just so we're
For sure, the chief of staff.
Just kidding.
I mean, have you seen Scandal?
Thanks. No, kidding.
How do you balance using data in hiring with maintaining still that human-centered approach you talked about?
Yeah, I think I talked about that a little bit before, but data is great. We love it. It provides insight. We look at trends. I love to see that we're adopting a lot more technology that gives us more insight into data, but they can never replace that sort of human element. We've all probably been introduced to or totally fallen in love with AI, ChatGPT, different areas of tools that are so amazing. But you couldn't just look at that. I mean, people have AI that helps build their resumes and things like that. And I think there's a lot of really great value in that and providing, editing and things like that. But I could say, hey, build me a resume to get me this job. But if I might make it through the first round, but when I finally have to speak to it, I better know what I'm talking about. Yeah. So all that being said, I think it's a useful tool to use that and helpful. It's helpful to have, data about an organization, but until you really talk to a person there, you don't really know. So it's important to always follow that up, I would say, with sort of a person element or human element there.
Yeah. And I think you do a good job of it. We love our data and we both are data driven decision makers, but that you can still have a moral compass when looking at data,
Absolutely.
right? And I think that's what you bring when we're always discussing the data or, the output and inputs of it for sure.
It can help you identify trends. It can help you identify, where there's areas of, that need to be addressed. But until you really dig in, you don't have the answers. And maybe you find out that there's something else influencing that. So, yeah, it can be directional, but I wouldn't say it's like without some level of input from the human side.
Right. Pay transparency and compensation equity are the top of mind topics, I think, everywhere. How is LSI navigating those conversations and what guidance would you give others?
Well, I think we definitely are improving on, kind of setting these specific pay bands and compensation, like identifying what's going in the market versus historically, just kind of thinking, okay, well, for this individual, maybe this is the right job. And where we used to make more, I would say, more specific roles built around people's capabilities. Now we identify, okay, here's the role that we need, and then we will open it up to everyone to apply, internal, external. We have it pretty well defined. Okay, this is the pay banding for it, and it's consistent. It's not, just for individuals, right? So,
Right, transparency, consistency.
yeah, and we really try to stay open about, this is what's coming up. These are, you know, opportunities that will be available or things like that we might want to just sort of share where historically maybe they weren't always as clearly communicated or open, So if there's a new person coming on, everyone's going to know there was a job posting. They went through a competitive process that everyone, who meets the qualifications was able to put in for it, that sort of thing. So
was there a time where your HR strategy was challenged, maybe during a difficult hiring season, organizational shift, and what did you learn?
I think, I don't know. I'm sort of, I think it's 2025. We're at the point, like, how long can I bring up COVID? Probably not much longer.
I don't know. I think you can.
It's really commonly known. I think everyone, and maybe I say this because I'm an HR professional, but the HR industry was really, or the field was really, really taxed during that time because we not only had difficulty in hiring, but now suddenly we have to send people home. How are we going to hire from home? How are we going to train from home? How are we going to lead from home? Who can go home and who can't, and layer on top of that benefits issues. We have really there was so much fear in the world. There was so much unknown, division across, the nation. I mean, it was a really challenging time, and HR had to sort of hold all those things together, right? So we're talking about how do we help you balance your benefits and also work from home with small children or take care of your parents who are maybe elderly. So that was a really challenging time for all the professionals in the HR world. And I think it caused us all to sort of challenge the way that we had operated and how
previously.
Yeah. And to adapt. I think historically, especially if you think about the reputation that HR people have, obviously to your husband, but just kidding. But that they're policy bound, there's no bend. HR said no. HR said no. That's always kind of been the reputation that, oh, don't let HR know. They'll tell us to stop. Will be a roadblock. We had to learn pretty quickly, the way that we've always done things is going to have to shift, and we have to enable the business to be able to do that. And so what I learned from that really quickly at that time was, and going forward is, we might have to change the way we do something, and it's not the end of the world. And if something's not working, if you keep tripping over the same branch, we don't need to develop pathways around it and caution tape. What can we move the branch?
Right.
Is there certain ways we can solve problems that maybe are creative or different than how we were before? Because when you're sort of left to those bare devices, you kind of have to figure out an alternative. So I learned a lot from that, and I would say going forward, I definitely think that it's important to not be to be able to pivot if you need to. Yeah.
Yep. And I think that, you said that you guys had to kind of challenge the way you've always done things, but you guys also had to do it and be on the bleeding edge of it because you
Mhm.
had to get all the CEO, you had to get all the rest of the people behind you. Like, hey, we know, okay, we're going to figure out what we're doing. We may not know what we're doing, but, and then counsel them and,
Mhm.
get them along because I think so many people as CEOs or manage, they didn't know what the hell to do.
No.
Right.
And that layer in, so all of that, we had to influence the business to sort of make these changes or consider these things with
Hmm.
the business changes. And then at the same time, comfort all the employees with all the challenges that they were going through and try to, you know, keep them like feeling energized and happy about all these changes that are happening. So it's like on one end, we're leading the change and saying, hey, we need to consider this or we need to change this. And then on the other end, as the employees are coming back around and they need some support and resources, we have to provide that for them too. So it was sort of like a full circle. Like we really have to be balanced in this approach because I don't want to implement something that's now I'm going to catch all this crap, on the other
Yep.
side. So we have to really think about, okay, is this effective? Is it going to work? And then what do we have to be prepared for to enable the workforce to get it done and to be successful with it?
Well, in COVID, you had this new generation coming up
Mm-hmm.
into the workforce at the time, and I watched a show over the weekend that I'm still laughing about because this 25-year-old said, I'm going to quit my corporate job. I'm in micro retirement." And her dad's like, "What's micro retirement?" She's like, "I'm just
Wow.
done. I'm going to like post on social. I'm going to do
Yeah.
whatever for a while." But that's that we're in that when you say pivot and be flexible, yes, COVID pushed us or catalyst us, that was the
Mm-hmm.
catalyst for everyone, not even just HR professionals, but for sure of, yeah, how do in this new generation, what does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
It's everything's going to look a lot different, right?
And that what during that experience at the beginning of COVID, I guess I came here in 2021, so we thought it was over, but it wasn't. But that the company I worked for was very largely represented by Gen Z employees, like first corporate job. So they were sort of, and now I think that was early. Now they're probably like sort of represented in that like micro retirement or even
Hmm.
the next generation that's come back. But um, it was just, I think, different generations, every different generation, we say they're all different in X ways, but there's a lot of similarities. But
Sure.
ultimately, I think it's about tolerance, like these newer generations are more willing to just say, no, I don't want to do that. I'm going to do something different. And I think there's value in that, but there's also, it's like, okay, what do we do with this? We've never really had just a whole group of people say the way we work, yeah, I'm going to do it different,
Yeah.
So we have to embrace that now. We have to think, okay, the way we've always operated in these generational sort of habits or values are starting to shift. Do we want to be ahead of it or do we want to be behind it? So now we have to think through, okay, how can we adapt the way we work to work with our new generation of employees?
Absolutely. For hiring managers and HR leaders listening today, what are some things, one or two things they could do this quarter to level up the recruiting process?
Okay, well, for the recruiting process, three things. I would say make sure that your postings, like your advertising for your job, is clear and compelling. Don't just list the duties, but make it compelling. It should be um, clear so that they know what the job entails, and it tells a story of who you are. So compelling. It's like, this is, who we are, why you want to work for us. Because like I said, there's thousands of, they're literally clicking through and reading through, yes, no, pass, no. So you definitely want to make your advertising great. I would say, secondly, make the candidate experience a
Top
good
notch.
experience, top notch. Yeah,
Yeah.
which means lots of communication, preparation. So you're communicating that timeline. They know what to expect. Nobody wants to feel like they applied for a job and they're not hearing back. Your automatic assumption is that you're not going to get the job or that you haven't been selected or passed moving forward. So the more you communicate, the better you're going to get. Like as a candidate, I would want to hear more than not. And then finally, and you said harping earlier, we harp on this a lot, but as an HR professional and a leader in the business, you have to be really in sync with what that role is. Like, what is that person that you need, or people, the profile of that? What kind of person is going to be successful in this role? So we ask a lot of questions about the posting and about preparing for phone screens, because the reality is the candidates are going to have really good questions and we want to be able to answer them. We don't want to say, well, I'm not sure, maybe that's a better question for the hiring manager, because we want to know up front how we best, address that. So to be really close and sync and really calibrate on what that kind of what we're looking for is really key too, because you'll save a lot of time on the back end and you'll appear a lot more prepared and like an employer I would want to proceed with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What are some small but impactful shifts companies can make today to better align hiring with their culture?
I think understanding what your culture, I mean, that sounds small, but it's not as easy as it sounds to
No,
understand
not at all.
or define your culture.
We're still learning every day.
Understand what it is and talk about it and truly try to represent it in the hiring process. I think when I talk to candidates, and which is not that often, Darcy does most of that and she does fantastic. But if I had to define our culture to a candidate, one of the things that I would really kind of highlight is, hey, we are a group of people that is very dynamic, and we are like, we want to get the best work we can done, and we will work together at whatever it takes to get it done. And I want them to understand, the candidate to understand, that that's sort of how we work. That's what you would define your culture, is how we work. Is like, we'll figure out whatever we need to do to get it done and make sure that we provide the best work for our clients. And so
Which I think people say that, but to us it's like, no, that means we wear several hats.
Yeah.
Some days I'm red teaming or reviewing a proposal. Right?
So I think if I was a candidate and I heard that, how I would interpret that is I would think, okay, there's probably going to be high expectations, but a good level of like teamwork and camaraderie that I can expect, and that I take pride in my work and I want to put my name on something that's going to be exceptional, that's going to do, be great. And so that's how I would interpret it. And that would tell me that if I'm just looking for a transactional job that I don't necessarily want to grow in, and that I don't want to, and I hate to say this because we don't expect people to put in, 50 hours a week or 60 hours a week. I think we do a really good job of trying to balance, but there are deadlines and things that sometimes things will drop last minute, and we have to band together. I think we've created a culture where that's rewarded and definitely appreciated.
Well, and on the flip side of that, we don't require that, but I that's why I respect companies even like Goldman, right? I've been recruited by them before, and I've interviewed heavily with them, and they're not lying. They're like, yeah. You're going to work 50, 60-hour weeks. It's tough. We're going to have, deadline. Their culture is they're completely honest and transparent about it, but it's kind of that grind, and that's great for some, and, thriving in chaos or whatever that is. But I think you're nailed it, is like just the transparency and how do your people work, right? Everyone says, oh, work-life balance. Well, what does that really look like?
Yeah. And I think it varies across the company, right? We are so like, we do a lot of diverse projects and things like that I think there's certainly some roles and some projects that might require different levels of engagement at different times. Like, no one's ever going to have to work a holiday on this one program. They never will. It's not going to be a requirement. And if that's really important to somebody, then we can share that. But there's definitely others where it's like, oh, you may, but you might be able to take a whole week off, and go spend time with your family anytime, So I think there's just value in identifying what matters to candidates and being transparent about, this is what it is. And they can also share what they care about and what they don't necessarily care about. So
for sure.
Yeah.
What's the one thing you hope listeners take away from this conversation about HR specifically as a strategic partner?
Well, I think for the HR leaders, it would be to really understand the business and the people operating in the business. I think if you're going to sort of operate behind a policy or a program and not really extend yourself to understand, what your workforce cares about, then you're probably not going to be as successful or at least transformative to the business. So understand what drives revenue for your business, but also what does your workforce care about? Do they care about work-life balance? Do they care about compensation? Is there a combination, which is usually the case? There's all different employees make up different values in the organization, but
Right.
how do you balance that and get to know them, understand who they are? Because especially in our type of environment, I know every single person, every employee's name, right? I am able to do that because we don't have, 8,000 employees that I'm in and out on. Maybe not, right away, but like I can understand, and everybody else here, they might not see the same information that I see, but there's no reason why you couldn't understand who everyone is and try to get to know them and help them to succeed with whatever contributions you may have for that person. Because rising tides rise all ships, right? So
Yep.
I think in this sort of environment, we have that unique opportunity.
Last question.
Oh, Lord.
This one's, and I've asked this one
Is it
before
good?
and I love it, is if you could ask a candidate one question that you're not allowed really to ask them today, what would it be?
Not allowed?
Not allowed, but it's not kosher to ask them today.
Oh, I don't want to ask anything. I do wish that we could, and it's kind of a double-edged sword, but going back to what I said before, I really want to understand what they care about, because I think as a candidate, I've been through different seasons too. There was one time in my life where I really cared about advancement and growth, and that was really what I cared about. There was then a time where, compensation was more of a driver for me. Maybe I was trying to buy a new house, or, I don't know. The time where I became a parent and suddenly none of that mattered. And
Yeah.
really what mattered was to be able to spend time with my family. I think candidates are probably a little guarded, and as a person interviewing, like, I don't want to say anything that might lend them to believe that I would make a choice based on that. It's not that it would disqualify them. It just helps me understand, okay, what are you looking for?
Right.
That's really helps me
But
understand.
they would feel judged by it.
Yeah. And you don't, I say that with people who are probably like, oh, yeah, no, we don't. No, I want to know, like, okay, this is what they care about. Here's what we can do for you. This is what we have, or hopefully you can, as an organization, you can meet all those needs. But I think people are guarded to say, like, a new parent is probably really, we've been taught as a woman too, that in the world, like, don't talk about having small kids or that you need to pick up from daycare because you won't get the job. And I would challenge that. I think I don't necessarily encourage everyone to go spilling all your personal stuff, but I think it's important to identify what's important to you and, like, kind of proof that out in the process, and not necessarily means, oh, won't work, but okay, how could we make that work? I can't tell you how many times we've gone back and said, hey, would it be okay if this person had to come in earlier and leave earlier? Yeah, no problem. Okay. Well, we never would have known that. And I myself have self-selected out of opportunities because of that reason. And looking back, thinking, had I been more open and honest in that, they might have said, well, we could work around that, So I think just being more clear about what you're going for, what you want, is great. So to ask to be able to really get that nugget, would love to really know what's driving them. Or they just want to make money. Like, great, we all do.
Right.
That's
And
why
say
we're
it
here.
and no one's going to judge you.
Yeah, no one's
You're just
judging
like,
you.
I just want $20 more an hour.
Yeah,
So that's
fair.
it.
That's a good raise.
Jess, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate your insight and appreciate that you are the first strategic partner in HR I've had, but also, one of my biggest confidants, and somebody that I go to here that some would say, right, you're my yin to my yang, because you're the one that's keeping me grounded or keeping me with people always in the forefront. But appreciate you joining us today.
Well, I appreciate that. And thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here.